Now, I opened my New York Times today, the business section. I don't read a lot of the business section. My investments are very limited. But there on the front page of the business section stands a man. Does he look contrite? Does he look arrogant? Does he look sorry? Does he look defiant? His name is Andrew Fastow. He was born and raised in New Providence, New Jersey. He married a rich woman whose father was enormously rich in Houston, Texas. He ultimately made his way there, having studied at Tufts, majoring in Chinese and economics. It sounds like a typical major for, after 1963, it's a typical major, Chinese and economics. At Tufts, he was known as a fairly arrogant guy. Even teachers talked about how arrogant he was. He would negotiate his grades. If he didn't like them, he would come up to the teacher to renegotiate them. So he developed a kind of reputation. He certainly was feisty. And he ultimately entered into the corporate world, into the fastest growing corporation in the United States of America, which was based in Houston and which offered employment to over 4,000 people. He became ultimately the chief financial officer. And he was on top. He was building for himself, I heard the rumor, an 11,000 square foot home. I mean, I would develop a heart condition just walking around. No, I mean, just walking around the place. 11,000 square foot home. And then his story of success, rising from the bottom to the top, and getting to the top was not always easy. Despite the fact that he reached the top of the financial world, of the business world, he always felt that he was insufficiently recognized. Certainly by Kenneth Lay, who had basically been the founder of the new Enron, the corporation for which he worked. And he was always pouting and complaining about the fact that he was insufficiently recognized. But I do want to tell you, the world has now given him sufficient recognition. That name is burned into our minds. And now he has been arrested. Well, there he stands in the picture, dressed in a lovely suit, and so I say, am I sorry for Andrew Fastow? Well, part of me, of course, has compassion for people who rise to the top and fall, but the other side of me says, good. Great. They got him. 4,000 mostly innocent people were the victims of his planning. And Andrew Fastow is a symbol of a problem. Over the last 25 years in the Western world, the corporate free enterprise world has been romanticized. It has been presented as a world filled with entrepreneurial heroes who go out, hopefully without government regulation, who go out to pioneer new ways to make things, to give jobs, to create jobs, all of that. They are the heroes of our society. They are feted, noticed, written about, praised. Well, he was one of them. And now he's a villain. And that's the problem that we're discussing today. The problem has to do with what is a hero? A hero certainly is an ethical human being, right? And if the fortunes of 4,000 employees are of no concern to you, their families, whatever it be, of no concern to you, if you can cream off the top while everybody else is going down the drain, $45 million, can you be called an ethical human being? Or is ethics irrelevant? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to talk about ethics, right? What do we mean by ethical? Put two people in one room, you may get at least 3 or 4 opinions on what is ethical, what is right, what is wrong. Ethics is about human behavior. It evaluates human behavior with 2 words that we use all the time. Now, we've been told since the mid-60s that it's not good to be judgmental. But I must tell you, sometimes I control myself, and parents are supposed to control themselves now in the presence of children and partners. It's very good to be non-judgmental, but I must tell you, you can control your mouth, but you can't control your thoughts. Right, wrong, wrong, right, right, wrong, wrong, right. We're doing that all the time. The people who drive by us and almost hit our car, right? The people who wait on us in stores and are discourteous. The people who ignore us when it's no longer convenient to notice us. We're doing it all the time, right? And all the time during the day we ask ourselves, is what I'm doing right? Right, wrong. Now, ethics exists because people live in groups. If we were solo beings, organisms, we would not need ethics. Ethics exists because we live in groups. We are social beings. We cannot survive without the group, some group, the family, the clan, the tribe, whatever it be. And therefore, to be ethical is to be concerned not only with the survival of me, but to be concerned with the survival and welfare of my group, of my community. And so in all cultures, not in any single one, in all cultures, there have emerged what we call values that are an expression of the ethical attitude. The first and primary one is trust. No group can survive without trust. Trust means that I can trust that you're telling me the truth, and I can also trust you, have faith in you when you say that you will do something, that you make a promise, right? You make a promise and you will keep it. Groups in which nobody keeps a promise don't last. They have no survival value. Ethics arises out of the human experience. It may come down on magic mountains, I don't know. But ethics arises out of the human experience. For groups to work, you need sharing. You cannot motivate people in a group to cooperate, right? Unless you're willing to share. If you want to take all the goodies for yourself, 45 million, no. If you want to take all the goodies for yourself, ultimately you won't have any cooperation in the group. All groups involve some level of sharing. And the big question is, how much sharing? And the third, and I hesitate to use this word since it is now psychologically incorrect. When I say incorrect, I mean politically, psychologically incorrect. But I'll use it. My mother used it a lot, but my contemporaries gave it up because their mothers used it a lot. Sacrifice. Do you remember? Oh, please. I'll only say it a couple times because I know for some people now that arouses all kinds of trouble. That is, Groups only function because the members of the group at some time or other, whether they're a mother or a father in a family, or a child in a family, or somebody in the neighborhood, are willing to make sacrifices for the welfare of the group. And when you look at those values, they indeed are the foundation of ethics. And you can add another one, certainly, because certainly the most popular value in the world that everybody talks about is love. Love is a feeling you can't make as a requirement. You can't order people to love anybody. I always find people, you shall love. Love is, you can't order feelings. You can order behavior. Love as a behavior is nurturing. Right? Whether you're nurturing children or nurturing spouses or nurturing others, it means that in some way or other you care. And you can nurture behaviorally without caring feeling-wise. You know, you can't feeling-wise love everybody, but you can be nice. And so that's ethics. Now, from the very beginning, there's a problem to ethics. The first problem is that there are other agendas. The major agenda that opposes the ethical agenda is called me. It's the prudential agenda. What ought I to do to maximize my happiness, my survival, my power? Now, it may be the case that when you do that, you also benefit the group. But in many cases, it may not be the case that when you promote yourself and only focus on yourself that you promote the group. In recent years, it has become very popular to say, if you take care of yourself, whatever, then it will always be good for the group. The result has been there's been a lot of dumping over the last 35 to 40 years. It isn't necessarily so. So therefore we have a juggling act. How much for me and how much for my group and my community? Oh, yeah. We're always juggling that, right? Sometimes we say, no more sacrifice. And then we get to the other point where we say, well, you know, it's too much me. I got to, you know, my life has no meaning if it's only me. Well, okay. The other, and it's a much more serious one, is which group? We all know people who will sacrifice for their family, but they won't do anything for their neighbors. They'll sacrifice for their neighbors and for the members of their own racial and ethnic group, but they won't do anything for anybody outside. Are they ethical? Well, they're willing to sacrifice, they're willing to share. They're not only thinking about themselves. If I'm a member of a corporation and I give my life to my corporation, but I don't care about the consequences of the behavior of my corporation, am I ethical? Well, I'm willing to sacrifice myself for my what? For my corporation. What if my corporation does things that harm society? Oh. See, ethics isn't simple. People say, oh, it's very simple. There are a few simple rules. If you memorize the 10 Commandments, that's all you need to do. Wrong. Ethics is very complex. The reason why ethics gives us a headache is because we're always juggling between me and the group and between group and group. And in a mixed society in which people are mixing all the time from different groups, I want to tell you, ethics is not easy. Now, the issues in ethics generally as they emerge have to do with sharing, the basic issues. There are all these things around that we need to share. Land. Who gets the land? Oh, yeah. Money. Who gets the money? Recognition. Who gets recognized? That was an issue for Andrew Fastow. Despite all the money he had at the top, he felt what? He felt that they were ignoring him. They were not recognizing him appropriately and sufficiently. Dignity. Dignity means the ability to be the master of your own life. Oh. Historically, only a very few people were allowed to do that. Who's entitled to it? Decisions. Do we share decision making, or do we turn over all decisions to one person or a few people? What's happened in this wonderful corporate world, as we see in the case of Enron, the fundamental decision making wasn't even in the hands of the shareholders, was it? Was it in the hands of the shareholders? Did they all get together to make these decisions about what Enron should do? Did even the board, were they part of his decision-making process? To some degree. There were basically 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 crucial individuals among the 4,000. Not even, if you will, the majority of the people who owned the place who were making the decisions. And of course, the issue is always how much nurturing do we share, and then we come to sacrifice. If I leave Enron when it goes down with $45 million as a kind of birthday gift, who knows? And you end up losing your pension, do you call that equal sacrifice? Now we have this whole issue of golden parachutes, where the top executives, who are supposed to be the heroic models of entrepreneurship, go sailing off. Their salaries rise, the worse the condition of the company, which they have arranged for. Now, there was, for most of human history, a traditional model for ethical behavior. It no longer exists, and that is the problem. So let me try to describe it. Up until about 200 years ago, or 300 years ago in the Western world, and it's still, this old model still exists in Africa and in Asia and many parts of Latin America, we have what's called the family model. The fundamental social unit of ethics is the family. You're born into it and you never leave it. And the family is bound together by mutual need and loyalty. And everything else is built on the family model. The clan, the tribe, the village, whatever it be, it's all built on the family model. The family model features 3 things. Surveillance. They're always watching you, and you're always watching them. I find when people's behavior is watched, they what? They behave better. They just do. I'm not watching. The second is intimidation. Intimidation means that in the family, people do not have equal power, and there are people who control the family who indeed say to children, you're what? You're misbehaving. Not only that, they may be in middle age, they could be 55 years old, but they have a parent still living in the family who's 85 who says, you're what? You're misbehaving. And the third thing, which is the glue of the ethical thing, is loyalty. In the family model, you don't join one family, then after 3 years you say, oh, I'm tired of this family. I think I'll move to another family. And then you try another family for a couple years, and you move to another family. I mean, the family model is what? You're there for life. It's called loyalty. And sometimes you mumble and grumble about the loyalty, and sometimes you don't like all your relatives or your siblings or whatever else it be. But in fact, That's the foundation of what we call historic ethics. If there was no family, there would be no ethics. Well, that world is gone. If it existed, if Andrew Fastow and Kenneth Lay and all those people at Enron had viewed Enron as their family, okay, then their behavior would have been entirely different. Kenneth Lay was very nice to his family. His wife, in fact, had a TV interview. Do you recall? I think her first name is Lisa. Lisa Lay, I don't know. And she talked about the virtues of her husband. Her husband most likely is what? Is wonderful. He's given her 18 bathrooms and 12 bedrooms. And no. He's loving. He would do anything for his children. They are his what? His family. He would make sacrifices for them. He might not go to golf one day in order to sit with a sick child. I don't know. But Enron was not a family. The corporation as it has evolved is not a family. And historically, ethics are built on the family model. You say, well, you're a member of this community. You're a member of this group. Mm-hmm. Not there. So now we have the new world. Over the last 300 years, by virtue of modern science and technology, there has arisen a whole new world in which we live. And in that world, some of the old ethical standards have difficulty functioning because the family model has collapsed. The revolution features science, industrialization, urbanization, people moving from small villages where they know everybody to big cities where they don't even talk to their next door neighbor, and therefore feel no responsibility. Democracy, in which we now say everybody has the right at least to make decisions about who the rulers will be, which now reduces the power of intimidation by those in authority. Liberalism, and by that I mean classical liberalism, which basically says that every person is entitled to be the master of his own life. He is first and above all an individual, not a member of a family. And in fact, an idea arose in a book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, which certainly lies behind the economy that was recommended by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Adam Smith wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations, and in it he said, the ideal society is not based on the family model. The ideal society is based on the market. Individuals encountering each other in the marketplace and trading their skills and their goods. And let the market decide what everybody gets. Fine. Okay. And let every person pursue his own welfare, because if he pursues his own welfare, along the way he will also benefit the society in which he exists. And that became the foundation, if we will, of the new free enterprise. Now, the new world, the new setting, which was created in this revolution, features something not in the family model. It's called the individual. In the family model, you are part of a family. Now you're an individual. Me. And in fact, that's reinforced by the fact that when you grow up, you leave your family. You go off to Los Angeles, Seattle, you may go to another place in the suburbs, who knows what. You're on your own. And you may meet somebody you fall in love with, but now you're an individual and she's an individual, or he's an individual and she's an individual, and whatever else it is. And now you can decide whether you want to stay together or what? Not stay together. I mean, everything is what? Everything's the individual. You may join a corporation and like it, and then what? You may decide, out of ambition, to what? To leave the corporation and go someplace else. But the ultimate reality is the individual. Andrew. And in fact, now in the new world, the market isn't just your village, it's the worldwide market. I mean, there's this huge, huge market filled mainly with people you don't even know. It's a world of mobility. In the family model, you were born into a place, and you stayed in that place for the rest of your life. That's what we do in family. Sometimes I run into 86-year-old people, they're still the baby. No, in the end, that's where you are. But now in this model is social climbing, because we're in this free and open society, and you can rise, and what enables you to rise is obviously money. Mm-hmm. So you rise. And you're moving. You move from place to place, you move from position to position, and now there's a quality to the new world that didn't exist in the family model. It's called ambition. I don't like where I am. I may not even like my family. So I may go somewhere else where I create now a whole new group of people who are my support group, whatever else it be. It's all part of ambition. It's a world of competition. We're all competing now for these goods, and the restraints that used to exist because we were loyal members intensely of a family are now broken down. We're mainly dealing and competing with strangers. Now, in this new world emerged an institution that did not exist in the traditional world. In the traditional world, there were businesses. People were in business. Roman times, Greek times, whatever. But most businesses, or almost all businesses, were what? Family businesses. You had a restaurant, so what? Some people still do that. Everybody works in the what? In the restaurant, and the reason why you've got cheap labor is because everybody's working in the restaurant to make it work. There used to be grocery store. That's the family model. And often you recruit labor through guilt. You're planning to go out and play, and your mother looks at you and says, "You're going to leave me alone in the store?" But now we have something called the corporation. The corporation emerged in the Renaissance. It was defined a little more clearly in the Enlightenment. By the beginning of the 18th century, they existed certainly in northwestern Europe, in Holland and in Europe and in France. In England and in France. The British East India Company, the British West India Company, the Dutch East India Company, the Dutch West India Company. Whatever it is, you now have something called the corporation. And the corporation is the result of this massive transformation of society. You need corporations because if you want to develop yourself in this new economy, you need large amounts of money. And the family doesn't have it. You now want large numbers of families to take their money and to invest it, to pool it. And as a result, there now arises this entity called the corporation. And with the corporation comes something that we call the stock market. You sell shares in your corporation. Investment banking. You need bankers now to go around and find the money that you need in order to conduct the work of the corporation. You have something called labor. You now recruit all kinds of individuals from different families. They come to work in your factory, in your corporation. Are they your children for whom you are responsible? If they're family, you'd never fire them. Do you fire your children when you don't have any money? You see, that's one of the problems in ethics. When you work for somebody for a long, long time, we can't help it. We tend to think of things like the family. Well, don't they have any loyalty to me? We do that. But the corporate model doesn't have it. The corporate model's mixed because in places like Japan, the corporate model took on some of the elements of what we call the family model. Once you got the job, you stayed forever. They took care of you. They were your parents, the whole thing. And in fact, one of the reasons why you gave them your loyalty so intensely was because you felt they were your family. They wouldn't abandon you, and that the executives wouldn't eat up all the wealth, that somehow or other they would what? They would share it with you. But now you got this huge labor force. When you need the labor, you pay them. When you don't need the labor, what? You don't pay them. It's a whole new ethical model. And now you develop, because corporations are big, you now have to develop big management. So you now develop these huge private bureaucracies that manage the corporation, who are different from the owners. The owners are the shareholders, but most of the shareholders aren't there checking on the work and what's going on. The corporation is, for all practical purposes, in the hands of the managers. Now, corporations initially tried to use the family model wherever it was useful. General Motors would get its people together and say, you are part of GM. GM is our home. GM is our place. Got that whole thing? And in fact, you gave your what? You gave your loyalty to the corporation the same way that you would give it to the family. What you expected in some way was that if you gave them your loyalty, they in turn wouldn't leave you out. They wouldn't run away with the loot and leave you abandoned. Now that model has virtually disappeared in America. I mean, there are some corporations where that exists, and there are some people, maybe in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, who working in corporations, if they're still working in the corporation, have what? I mean, have some vestige of this. For people below 50, they have a career. They are individuals and they have a career. And in fact, they're recruited for this corporation. And they'll stay in this corporation as long as it's what? Useful for their career, and they can make their money and what? And get better credentials. Then they're going to move on to the what? To the next corporation, and then to the next corporation. And when they get to the corporation to work for it, since they have a very strong private and personal agenda, they will use that opportunity for their own self-aggrandizement. Is it good for the corporation? Is it good for the community? Well, the corporation, of course, as it evolved, faced a lot of challenges. One, of course, was the challenge of monopoly. What if a corporation controls an entire industry? I mean, after all, Enron was concerned with natural gas and electricity, huh? What if Enron would ultimately, in a great success story, sweep over the land and become the possessor and controller of most of the natural gas and the electricity? Well, would they control the prices? One of the challenges, certainly, is the challenge of conspiracy. Corporations get together and they decide that they will fix the prices. Is it good for the public? No. Is it good for the corporation and the managers? The answer is yes. Then there's a whole issue of quality. You go to the store, you buy something produced by a corporation. They may, in fact, use inferior ingredients. in making the thing that they're selling to you. And certainly for a long, long time, there were countless cases of quality abuse. And then there's the whole problem of speculation. What if I'm a corporation and I want to sell my stock? And we all hype things. I mean, I listen to people talking about their children, and their grandchildren, whatever else. And in most cases, it's true. But I mean, but what if I'm really desperate to sell it? Might I be motivated to lie? Enron lied, didn't it lie? In fact, a lot of the high-tech companies that went down a couple of years ago, lied. They over-touted the goods they were selling. Who was going to control their propaganda so that you, the innocent bystander with your money, I mean, how do you know? They're telling the truth. Certainly one of the challenges is patriotism. Well, I may not be totally loyal to my employees the way we used to be loyal to our employees, but I am an American. And I want to protect American jobs. This is an ethical issue with some of the unions, isn't it? Well, here you have a very interesting tension between what is my group. Is my group America or is my group the world? If my group is America, then I will what? Not move my factory outside the country. If my group is the world, whatever, or just the corporation, then I may choose to do that. Now, the response to all of that was that government imposed a series of regulations, restrictions on corporations to somehow control their behavior, to make it, as it was viewed by the public in general, and it was controversial, more ethical. One, the government allowed, certainly by the 1930s in the United States of America, allowed and authorized the creation of both craft unions and industrial unions that could make demands on the corporations and the employers. The second thing, at the beginning of the 20th century, they broke up the monopolies. The third is they provided qualifications and regulations. You've got all the Food and Drug Administration, that is. There are all these things, all these products you have that now have to be regulated in terms of quality. And after the Depression, we created the Securities and Exchange Commission to make sure that the sale of securities and the sale of stock would be regulated, that lying would not take place, and that inappropriate speculation would not. They were all restrictions on the life of the corporation. We even dealt with corporations dismissing their employees by creating a welfare system which included unemployment insurance, so that there would be something for them. Well, starting in the 1970s, there arose a rebellion against these restrictions. That's the beginning of the era of Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And in fact, the rebellion started off by saying, all this government regulation is bad for the country and bad for the people, because what it produces is a huge number of parasitic, inefficient managers called bureaucrats who don't know how to manage. What we need to do is to return management back to the people who know how to manage, the people who indeed are competing for profit. They are the private corporations. And in fact, the argument was sufficiently strong that most people in the United States of America certainly bought the message. And that was the rebellion. And the rebellion featured, if you will, this whole thing about get the government out of business. privatize, deregulate, decentralize. Well, and the villains always were, the word became a very nasty word. In the 1930s, it was a pleasant word. By the 1980s, it was a nasty word. I'll give you the word. It's not as bad as sacrifice. Government. Do you remember that word? It was a what? It's like a terrible word. Government bureaucrats. Bureaucrats, incompetence, corruption, parasites. Well, I do want to say that along the way during this period of rebellion, the corporation was transformed. In fact, in the 80s and 90s, most national corporations, certainly in what I call Western Europe and North America, or major ones, became international corporations. That is, although they might have their headquarters in a particular nation, their markets and their employees were all over the place. And that's interesting about ethics. If I'm an American manager and I have Mexican employees, what is my moral responsibility to the people who work for me? They may not speak the same language, and I may see them as what? Somewhat. Once you broaden this whole thing, the what? The corporation becomes much more complex. And the new corporation was filled with what I call mergers. In the competition bit, certainly in the 80s, one corporation, big one, was trying to gobble up another. And often they would gobble them up not for the purpose of making them better, but for the purpose of scavenging them. And then there was this endless mobility. And in the age of the international corporation, your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are just what? They're moving all over the place. One day they're stationed in New York, and then the corporation moves them to LA, and then the corporation moves them to Seattle, then it moves them to London, moves them to Hong Kong. I mean, who knows where? And the number of people who stayed with one corporation for their whole life, I used to know people like that. They were Ford people, they were GM people, they were Chrysler people. It's gone. You're still there? It's 5 years. You're still there. You must be a failure. Okay. Don't you have any ambition? And now there are new competitions because there are new industries emerging. One of them certainly is the artifact we call a computer, which produces the high-tech industry, all right, and which actually produced in terms of its development a year ago, a great debacle where what? There was high touting of the values of these high-tech corporations, and in many cases they proved to be empty toutings. And certainly one of the big things, because you got to fuel all this development, is energy. That's why Enron grew so fast. I mean, they start off as this Houston Natural Gas Company in 1985. They had a pipeline. And then Kenneth Lay came along. And he's a big thinker. And now it's not just a pipeline. Now what we want to go into is selling energy. And in fact, maybe the best thing to do is not to own any facility at all.